pledge allegiance to the
flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We actually started this meeting earlier for a closed session, so we do not need to do attendance roll call. I need approval of the agenda. A motion for the agenda?
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor of the agenda state aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Agenda is approved. Moving on to consent agenda. I have a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented, or does anyone have any specific things they would like brought out separately?
I'll move to approve.
Take a second.
Second.
All those in favor of consent agenda, or any discussion or anything brought out separately? Sorry. Hearing none. All those in favor of the consent agenda state aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Consent agenda is unanimously approved. Superintendent's report.
Good evening. Welcome to August already. I have 5 agenda items for this evening. The first is a visitor management software pilot that actually is Jeremiah here. He just had which is the assessment update, and Dr. Ted Gennerman, who is our Director of Student Services and Assessment, will provide us with an update. As you know, with many of the changes occurring within our system, we just wanted to make sure the board and the community were aware of some of the things that would be adjusted for the 14-15 school year and moving forward. So Ted will provide some background, some overview regarding that.
Thank you for the lengthy introduction to give me a little time. All right. There's one. Yeah, there's one sitting over there. So, all right. Hopefully this works. Thank you very much. So I'm going to spend just a couple minutes talking about a few changes that we're going to see this year with the Wisconsin Student Assessment System. And I'll talk briefly about some of the ways that we'll be sharing this information with parents. And for your viewing pleasure, I've also included in the packet the assessment calendar, which is kind of a big, colorful document. I won't spend a lot of time on that, but I did want you to have it just in case you were asked questions about some of the assessments that we were doing in the district. So I want to start by saying I think we live in really exciting times with regard to assessment in education. This year actually marks 20 years for me in education. So this August, or August 20 years ago, I was just about to sit in our first meeting with Milwaukee Public Schools. That's where I started. And we had, and I'll never forget, actually, the first presenter we had was talking about RTI, which was, so far out of what we were thinking we were going to be doing in education at that time. But she painted this picture of a time where we were going to have data for every student, the ability to track where individual students were at, and that this information was going to be easily accessible and at our fingertips. And she went on to say that not only would we have that information, but it was going to be the expectation that teachers were going to use this information to really guide how they instructed students to meet their needs where they were at. And so I'm here to tell you tonight that we're not quite there yet, but we are getting close. We are getting very close, and it's very exciting. So, share some of the trends that are going on in terms of assessment. When you look at the expectations of RTI and the available or soon to be available tools, you can feel that vision really starting to come together, and it's exciting because we know the potential that we can have on student achievement. But we also really recognize that tools alone are not going to do it. I mean, we've had data for a long time. We also have to take a look at training teachers, working with teachers and administrators to think about using data differently. And so these are all things that are in process for us. Attitudes are also shifting in terms of kind of the locus of the issue. So it used to be, and when I say used to, we're just talking a couple of years ago, if a student was struggling, the assumption was it was a problem with the student. We were doing fine as teachers. It was a problem with the student. But the assumption with RTI and with some of the other things that we're doing has really shifted to be, we're asking ourselves, are we providing the services that the student needs? Are we teaching the student in the way that they need to be taught? We're also moving toward unprecedented levels of transparency with data in terms of how students are performing. So from classroom to classroom, teacher to teacher, school to school, getting really clear about where students are performing in every class, and then trying to learn from teachers who consistently have teachers who are achieving at high levels. And some of the work that was done last year, and will continue this year with Karen Hess, as well as some of the newer assessments like Smarter Balance, we're also assessing deeper levels of problem solving than we've ever done before. Assessment's also morphing into a process rather than just an event. So it used to be, you didn't do anything and then there was a kind of a summative at the end. Now we're really, we're focusing on pre-assessment, so we understand where kids are starting, assessing them throughout the time so we're understanding how they're progressing toward the targets, and then assessing at the end. And it really helps us get a better idea of where students are at and helping them achieve before they've fallen so far behind. And finally, while we have a lot to learn, but we're seeing assessment driving instruction. With the tools that we've got, we're seeing those changes beginning to happen, and it's exciting. We have a ways to go with it, admittedly, but it's happening, and so it is exciting. So that's where assessment is going. Let's talk a little bit about the changes with the Wisconsin Student Assessment System. First is the PALS assessment, which is the Phonological Awareness Literacy Screening. This is a required state assessment for all K-4 through second grade students. What's new this year is actually the inclusion of second grade students. So a couple of years ago, it was just K-4 and kindergarten. Then it moved to first grade was included, and this year, second grade is also included. WKCE, as you, I believe, are probably aware, has been discontinued as our state assessment in the area of reading and math, but it will continue to assess science and social studies for grades 4, 8, and 10. Smarter Balanced is replacing WKCE as a state assessment in 3rd through 8th grade. It's a spring administration rather than, so I'll share for some of these I'll share a few details about them because they are new. It's a spring administration rather than a fall administration, which is helpful because there's always been that, which teacher do we look at for how the student progressed over the year? And when we have a spring administration, it's a little bit easier to say, it was during the course of the school year, so that'll be helpful. Smarter Balance blends, some of the more traditional test items with performance items, which we talked about in an earlier meeting, which is a significant shift for our students and for our teachers. But I think a number of things that we've been doing in the district to prepare for that are going to help us out. But that's a pretty big shift. Also, over the last 2 years, we've been involved with the Smarter Balance pilot, and so we've had a number of our schools involved, and so I think we have a reasonably good idea of what to expect. It's just putting it all together for district-wide now. At the high school level, we have ACT Aspire, which will be replacing Explore and Plan. For all 9th grade students, they'll take it twice. They'll take it in the fall and then again in the spring. 10th grade students take it in fall only. Aspire measures English, writing, math, reading, and science. And what's kind of cool about it as well is it provides a predicted ACT score. So it kind of helps us sort of anticipate how a student might do on the ACT. So again, we have that additional data so we can get in there and help support the student as needed. That's a computer-based administration with an estimated 250-minute administration time. So it's a lot of time for that administration. ACT is going to be for all 11th grade students. Similar but different than the ACT that we think of. It's similar in terms of the actual test, but this is a one-shot deal. So for colleges, you can take it multiple times and generally take the highest score. This one, we have one date and a makeup date. But we have one date, and that's the administration that the student, that's the one that counts.
Counts for the district.
Counts for the, correct, counts for the district, thank you. Students may use, they can use accommodations on that as well, but if you use accommodations, they're very strict with accommodations for ACT for college entrance. So if you use accommodations on it for the district, you typically can't use it for college admission, but it's going to be a good thing because it's going to level that playing field, having all of our students taking a very difficult assessment. And that one is a paper and pencil administration. Also, ACT work keys for all 11th grade students, and this assesses more applied skills, including applied math, locating information, and reading for information. This is also a paper and pencil assessment. And finally, and I neglected to, I included it here, but it's not in your packet, dynamic learning maps is for grades 3 through 11, and that replaces what used to be the WKCE WAA, which is Wisconsin Alternative Assessment, and that's for the students who are really our most significantly cognitively delayed students. They're students that, even with accommodations and modifications, the regular test just wouldn't be appropriate for them or give us a very good measure of how they're progressing. So obviously, this is a year with a lot of significant changes in terms of what is being assessed and how students are being assessed. And certainly we recognize the importance of connecting with kids, connecting with families. Unfortunately, the state also recognizes that we're probably going to need that information, so they've been putting out a variety of pieces of literature and information for us to share with parents. So over the next month and throughout the year, I'll be working with principals and at the district office to really make sure that we are making parents aware of the different assessments as they're coming up. We're also creating a district assessment webpage that will be updated regularly as a place where parents can go to get additional information as well. So a lot of information kind of quickly, but some of it I think you're kind of aware of, so I didn't want to spend too much time. Are there any questions about the changes? Okay. So I also included the assessment calendar. And again, I don't want to spend a lot of time talking about it. It's a bit of a complicated document. But what it essentially is a listing of our district and state assessments. It outlines what assessments we use, what skills we're measuring, the purpose of the assessment, whether it's just achievement or whether we're looking at growth as well, the name of the assessment, and it also outlines responsibility. So who's responsible to administer it, who's responsible to enter the scores, and also what students take it. So some assessments are for all students. We have some students that the students who are identified as English language learners take. So really identify who takes the assessments. What's exciting about this year is we've taken a lot of time, as deceptively complicated as I learned, aligning all of the windows, all of these test windows. They can be moved around within certain parameters. So we went to great pains to try to really align all of our windows so that we can make sure that principals and teachers have up-to-date data when they need it. So before those universal screening times, that's when we talk about the needs of all students. During our mid-cycle progress reviews, that's where we talk about the needs of students who are currently in intervention, and then report card times as well. So we really tried to make sure that the windows were opening and closing so that we would have that information in kind of a tight fashion. It used to be that they're kind of smattered all over the place, and so windows would open and close, and principals weren't sure what was happening when, and we'd get information at different times. It just wasn't particularly useful. I've also identified specific days that I'm asking school psychologists to block out of their calendar because it's days where they'll be pulling that data and putting it in a format that principals can use, right, that principals and teams. And again, so what's new this year is historically we haven't identified whose responsibility that was. So in some places it was a principal, some places it was a coach, some places it was a teacher, and when it's going to be done. So to make sure those windows close and then immediately after, we pull that data together and we have it so that teachers and principals can use it right away. And then finally, I'll be working with Melanie here at the ESC to calendar time also immediately after the windows close to make sure that teachers have entered all that information, that it's correct. Because historically we've had, sometimes there would be missing data and the teacher would say, well, I entered the data, and so we'd have to search around for it. This way, windows are going to be closed, as the assessment windows are closing, we're getting right in there, we're making sure that all the data is there, that it's usable, that we get it in the hands of principals and teachers so that they can use it. It's exciting. It's exciting to me, but I live it, so kind of a sad world perhaps, but no, it really is. It's going to make a real difference for kids. We have steps to go yet, but it's exciting. So are there any questions about the assessment calendar or any of the pieces that I've talked about? Well, that's all I've got. So thank you very much for your time.
The only other thing, Ted, that we talked about is communication with the parents. And is there a specific, as far as the website, you'll have that?
Yep.
Will there be an campus sort of message sent out?
Yeah, so I plan on, we're working with principals to really figure out what the best way, so whether it's having it included as part of their newsletters, whether it's kind of something that's sent separately, or whether it's Infinite Campus kind of thing. But we'll be doing it in multiple ways to make sure that we're reaching out to everybody so that they know what's coming, when it's coming, and how they can prepare. And
thanks for restating.
Yeah, no.
Okay. right, we'll go back to visitor management software pilot. Jeremiah, thank you so much, Ted. Appreciate it.
Hello. Hello. Our district's emergency response team, we meet basically every other month, and we try to look at best practices for keeping our facilities safe and secure, and revisit our crisis plans. During the past year, we looked at a visitor management software to try to shore up how we handle visitors as they come into the buildings. Each school has their own way of doing it, so it is being done, but we looked at a unified approach that also offers some extra incentives for using the program. So we're going to be piloting at the high school this year, Raptor Visitor Management Software, which, in a nutshell, as a visitor comes into the building, they would sign in as usual, except for now they'll just be handing over an ID or a driver's license. We'll scan that through a badge system, which will immediately print out a badge with the person's face, their destination, how long they intend to be in the building. And also, those records will always be housed with us. And also, as it scans the person's name, it also runs that person's ID against the National Sex Offender Database. So we will end up being able to identify if somebody's in our building that shouldn't be in our building, and be able to process that as the program would call for. It's a really streamlined approach. It's being taken on by several other school districts in the area. Oconomowoc is fully implementing it, and at least 3 other districts in our area are piloting it this year as well. So we're going to give it a try at the high school, and I think it'll be a really successful program.
Is there a cost to pilot it?
Yeah, it was an upfront cost of about $1,500. It does come with not only the software but hardware too, like the badge printer plus the badge rolls, and the setup costs and training and everything that was included with the setup costs.
Okay.
Jeremiah, does this include an electrician who's working on site, a delivery driver who stops in to drop something off?
We could, as a district, work it however we feel like it's necessary. Some of our facilities will just have a drop-off at our receiving area, so it might not be as practical for that person to go around to the office and come back to receiving. So it may be on a case-by-case basis, but I would say at least 98% of our visitors would be going through this process. If we have preferred contractors that are always in our facilities, they may just have a badge on them at all times to identify themselves.
Is a preferred contractor, so a preferred contractor is somebody who's in the building often?
Correct.
Is background check done on them in order to become a preferred contractor?
Sure. We could always do that initially to, as we start up the program, have everybody that's always in our building scan through and do that. Or we can do periodically too. So
we do that now?
Right now, we just issue visitor badges and contractor badges, so we don't do any background checks.
So do we have any, unless you want to,
I'm
sorry, didn't mean to cut you off. So we hire, say the weight room is being redone. It's looking good, by the way, I saw it. And we have a bunch of different contractors coming in and out. We have no requirements for contractors that they've done any background checks on these people. They could be sex offenders, parolees, felons.
As the state law goes, if somebody is a sex offender, it's their responsibility to report it to us. That was just a law that was instituted this past year. So no, and because the turnover rate, I can predict who. We have a couple contractors that are kind of mom and pops where you know who you're going to get for an electrician because he's the owner-operator. Mm-hmm. But if I bring in a Hunzinger, they could have 50 different guys rotated through. So
I think that might be something you might want to bring up in your little group thing there with all the different districts. I wouldn't mind if we looked at doing that internally. We have a lot of contractors coming in and out of our buildings, and sure seems like an easy way to get in the back door if you're, not someone who should be here.
Sure. I agree. I think that's your risk. I think if you don't do this 100% across the board and outside of your mail have drop-off points, they'll find that weak point, exploit it. And I've got a question of Jeremiah. So right now, if somebody walked in and just following the note section you have in that software, the Raptor software ran the person's ID and it came up positive on the National Sex Offender Database, what's our response to that individual right there?
Sure. Essentially, the protocols that I've seen from other sample districts, we still have to do the training, would just involve them having to take a seat for a moment. The second it came up as a positive hit and it was identified as a positive, it would send an email or a text message or a phone call to whatever chain of administrators you would have, and then the administrator would pull them aside and ask them to identify, if in fact they are a sex offender and whether they're gained access to the property. And it doesn't say that they can't come on property, because they are allowed on property, especially if they have students that are in the school district, but at least they are required to notify us. So it would be our determination at that time if we would call the police or if it was...
So at that point, I guess that's my point. So if we have to find out, they obviously didn't volunteer it, would we then alert an SRO from one of the 3 SROs that we have and incorporate them to possibly look at that? Just a thought.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. All right, thank you.
How fast is that search? I mean, it's within minutes? I mean,
Seconds. Seconds,
Okay.
yeah. Every once in a while, if you got like a John Smith, there could be duplicates because it runs off the birthday and the name and the state. So you would scroll through the pictures to get the match to your ID that's pulled up there. So very seamless, almost a turnover in just seconds. It spits in, spits out. Some of the districts, Oconomowoc actually setting up kiosks where it's not even involving an AA anymore. They just scan their own badge and put it in.
So the person coming up would scan their own badge?
Person
Scan their own
walking
ID.
in would scan their own ID and then print out their badge for them. So.
Okay.
Do you recommend anyone discuss if the person coming in has concerns that their ID information, like a driver's license information, is going to be retained?
There is an alternative. If they don't want to submit their ID, they can also just type in their name, and their name would hold name and date of birth. So if somebody doesn't have an ID.
Well, because we all hear about
Sure.
breaches of the security and the data that's being stored. So here's another system storing personal identifying information.
Sure.
Okay.
Although,
On that one, so what would the point be or I would assume here, let me start with that. So you walk in and I'm uncomfortable handing my driver's license to someone. But I would hope that after I fill out my name, I have to at least verify, it has to be verified with a picture ID. Or what would be the point of the system?
Right.
Right.
I'm speaking specifically that the way that it's
you're
written,
handing it
you're
to them.
handing it, there's a scan, and there's a system that's retaining
Uh,
your information.
Based on that scan,
Right.
that takes the
Yep.
driver's license information.
With my
Okay,
picture.
Okay. But the actual verifying, just like you would signing a credit or a bank statement or something, that would be acceptable, right? That would still, I hope we wouldn't have an issue with that. Right?
Yeah, I'm just,
Okay, no,
talking
I'm just
scenario.
trying to fill this out too here, so there's
So
drawing
we would
scenarios.
pilot it at the high school.
Correct.
For 14-15, and we'd come back and give the board an update on how things went and whether or not we'd be expanding it system-wide and what kind of approaches we've decided on with regard to those specifics.
Sure. And as part of our team, we have principals, police lieutenants, fire personnel, and everybody was really in favor of this option as a good first measure of people visiting our building. We have had instances where we needed to go back and find out who was in our facilities, and apart from camera software that we don't have much to identify other than sign-in. So it'd be a really good record-keeping tool to find out who was in our facilities at certain times, too. So.
To go back to Rick's previous point about our contractors and his example,
Sure.
That's something that's been in the back of my mind for quite some time. So I guess I kind of echo his sentiments and like to see some sort of plan going forward to address that type of person that's in our building.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. We can run it 100% across the board, and we hadn't talked too much in the ERT about the exact specifics. I just know that there's going to be logistics issues, but we can make that happen. So, okay.
I think this is a great way to start filling in some of our security holes, and as you use it, I think you're going to have to start possibly modifying or making some changes that you want that you'll feel. Wait a minute, I didn't realize that. For example, the contractors, this could happen. That could happen. So I think it's a good start, but I think you're going to want to be keeping a close eye on it, obviously, and making whatever changes you need to. And then once the pilot's complete, you'll be presenting it to go out to the other schools.
Yep.
And you'll tell us what all these holes in the security that you found.
Sure, correct.
Okay.
And to state, we do have every contractor sign in. So everybody across the board right now has the exact same policy, I guess with the exception of some, like a UPS guy that's just delivering to the receiving and leaving. But every contractor does sign on a badge at the receiving room or the front office. So right now across the board, everybody's doing exactly what they should be doing. So this is an upgrade for everybody across the high school.
So contractor, if it's a regular electrician, we see, they're going to have a permanent badge, so they just can sign in at receiving, or?
I would envision that if we ran it once, or if we ran them quarterly, then they would have that permanent badge, because right now they just have the contractor badge that gets them to where they got to go. Or unless we decide it's every time. Every time they come through, they report to the office and sign in.
So we have, let's say John Smith is a regular electrician, comes in, and for some reason we may need to be alerted after we've issued him the badge. Will that come through at a later time? 2 weeks later?
It doesn't report after the fact, but it is always up to date. So if somebody, 2 weeks, if their status changes over 2 weeks and they run it, then we get the update.
So we have to physically run it every time?
Correct.
Well, and I think for something like what we're discussing, we could probably put language into our agreements with our contractors and make the onus on them that they're supposed to be checking their employees and notifying us. If we find out they're not doing it, well, then it puts their relationship with us in jeopardy, but then make them be responsible. And then they could put requirements of their employees that if something like this happens, they have to notify. Similar, like anyone who has a driving job with a DUI, not much different. So.
Any other questions for John? No? Well, thank you, and thank you to your team for continuing to look at ways to boost security within our system. So.
Thanks, guys. Have a great night.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jeremiah.
Okay, just a couple of other items. Evidence-based leadership. We will have our leadership team attending a conference in Chicago over the next couple of days, and then we'll have a day off-site in Milwaukee, integrating those tactics and data analysis approaches into our practice on Thursday. So we have a leadership learning week ahead of us. So looking forward to that. Just wanted to inform the board of those learning opportunities.
Who's not back here? Are you guys all going? Or?
We're all going.
All right.
We are all going. So we're, an hour and a half away. So just have to. There's something big happening, but at least students and teachers aren't here for the most part. Policy work sessions. We are completing from the administrative perspective, we are completing our Neola process of policy review and rewrite on August 21st. So that'll be our last full day to, complete the remaining policies and kind of come back to some of the ones that we put aside to have further dialogue about. What I'd like to do, what I'm proposing is to have to schedule a board work session on September 29th from 6:30 to 8:30 and talk about the policies. It's very expansive. We have a lot of policies, even though we've kind of trickled some through over the last few months. And then talk about a process that we would look at what policies are different, are brand new to our system, what are remaining the same, what are a cross between the two, so it's called a crosswalk. We'll walk through that. We'll also agree on an approach because not all of the policies will need to go through a work session for us to discuss every single policy, but if the board reviews them and there might be a number of them that are very much aligned with state statute, and it's just reiterating the state statute, that the board might be comfortable with us just going through, the process of approval rather than going through the work session. But there'll be a number of them that you'll want to have further dialogue about and around. So we'll look at designing an approach to do that. We'll identify some policies and then schedule time with the board on Monday night, and I have a few fall work session opportunities in October, November, December listed there that we can schedule based on the number of policies the board would like to spend work time, actual work session time on. If we want to have the full policy and administrative guidelines completed by the end of this year so that we can start the 15-16 school year with our new policies online, right, even attached to our board docs. They would upload that, and every 6 months would give us some updates. We would need to have the approval of all of the policies sometime either in December or January from the board's perspective, and then we would start working on the administrative rules, which kind of give the administrators guidelines on how to implement those policies and what would our structures be and our approaches be. So, it's relatively ambitious, but it would get us to the goal of having everything turn over fully for the 15-16 school year. But of course, we're agile, and if we're getting through it, we're in the muck of everything, and we feel like we need more time, we can certainly do that. So I'm just bringing that forward. I scheduled a September 29th meeting for us, and that's when I would, kind of give you the booklets, and we would talk about an approach. We might give only partial booklets, or whatever the board would feel is most appropriate. So, any problem with, or any questions or concerns about that approach? Okay, I'll be scheduling that September 29th date then. And I'll put it tentatively, the other dates tentatively on your schedules as well, and then we can verify those on September 29th, just so that everybody's aware of it.
Are we set up now on Google that you can add them to our calendars or not?
Yes.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And lastly, just a congratulations to the boys varsity baseball coaches and athletes for being recognized by the Classic 8 Conference for the Sportsmanship Award. So we are incredibly blessed to have coaches and athletes that demonstrate wonderful sportsmanship, and this is nothing new, as even the last board meeting that we had, that we are recognized by the Classic 8 Conference for sportsmanship. So congratulations. That concludes my report.
Thank you very much. President's report. Just a couple of items. In front of you, I just shared with you Mr. Simpson. He's a newly retired educator that went through our system. He wanted to share some of his observations during his career with the board, but didn't want to go up in front of a public forum and doesn't send emails. So he stopped by before the meeting and asked me to share his observations with us. So that's in front of you. Any specific questions or anything, you can always ask Dr. Thompson for clarifications on some of those, or if it's something you want a work session or agenda item, let us know. Next item, Chamber of Commerce, of which the school district is a member, is having their annual golf meeting coming up, and typically we try to get 4 some or more together. So if anyone's interested, it is on September 11th. It's at Mnsd Lakes Country Club, I believe. Is it? I just got the thing today. Okay, it's at Mnsd Lakes Country Club. I'm going to try making it, so if any of you administrators who golf we had a lot of fun last year when we did it. If a high score was good, we would win. But anyway, any board members or administrators or staff members that are interested in, let us know. But I'm not sure if you're going to do it again this year, but I plan on it. So a lot of fun. And lastly, a little change on how I'm going to handle committee reports going forward. So for those of you that are chairman of our committees, if we don't have a meeting that night, I am going to skip over it unless I hear from you before the meeting that you want to say something, because calling 2 committees for you to say we had no meeting is a waste of our time at this. And that concludes my report. Moving on, board member reports. Using this for one of you guys report on how nice the new band uniforms look from band camp last week.
Actually, they did look nice.
See? Anything else? All right. Moving on, I'm assuming no one has a committee report since we didn't have meetings tonight. Student representation is not here because of the summer. Public forum. Anyone wish to discuss any topics with the school board? Now's your chance. I see one coming forward.
I just want to say tonight's my last
State
night.
your name and address for the record, please.
My name is Brittany Ayers, W209SN0480, Valerie Drive, Muskegon, Wisconsin.
Thank you.
All right. It's my last night tonight, so I just wanted to say thank you for having me work here for you guys. And I've enjoyed meeting all of you.
No, thanks for all your work.
Yeah, of course. Thank
Good
you.
luck in the fall.
Thank you.
Does anyone else have anything they'd like to discuss or bring forward to the board? Hearing none. Resolution action items 5A 2014-15 KPO/board goals.
Motion to approve the 2014-15 key performance objectives and board goals as presented.
So moved.
Discussion?
There are no changes from our discussion in July regarding the 4 key performance objectives, district level goals, and the 3 board goals.
Is everyone comfortable with where we are? Any comments or suggested changes? Talkative bunch tonight. Hearing none. All those in favor state aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The item 5A passes unanimously. Item 5B, Muskego High School Principal.
Motion to approve Dr. Dennis Bussin as interim Muskego High School principal for the 2014-2015 school year.
So moved.
Second.
Discussion? For those of you watching at home, we are filling the position that will be vacated, when's Ryan's last day? August 6th by Mr. Ortel, who's our current high school principal. He's accepted an administrative position with another school district. And because of the notice of where we are with the school year, we feel as a board that it is best to hire an interim principal to fill that role while we are conducting a local and national search for that position. It's a very valuable position to our district, and we feel Dr. Bussin, having held that position for a number of years, filling that position on an interim role is the ideal candidate. And so we welcome him back and wish the administration luck in finding an outstanding replacement for Mr. Ortel. That being said, all those in favor state aye.
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 Opposed? Motion is passed unanimously.
And Dr. Bussin will be starting tomorrow?
Yes.
Thank you.
Moving on to discussion items. Item 6A, 2014-2015 budget draft.
So Julie.
Okay, in board docs, I uploaded the preliminary information for the budget for 2014-15. I know you were all on the edge of your seat waiting for it. The first document I would like to go over is the one that's titled the Budget Adoption Workbook. And this is a format that's relatively, I think it's relatively ugly, but it's what we're required to submit in the newspaper and DPI. So this is the format in which you will be approving the budget on August 18th. I'll go through it, but just to give you a general overview, the board itself will approve this budget so that we are able to post a notice in the newspaper for the annual meeting and also prepare the annual meeting packet. At the annual meeting, though, we usually have a regular board meeting directly after, in which we'll have all of our final numbers from DPI, which we don't get until October. And so there may be a few revisions at that time, right after the annual meeting, that you would approve in order for us to set the tax levy, which is the first week of November. So for on a preliminary basis, the way that this format is laid out, it goes basically by funds. So our general fund is all of our general operations. And at the beginning of the general fund budget, you'll notice we have our fund balance listed there at $18.5 million. And that's an estimate based on unaudited numbers at this point. We just had our audit complete, and so we will be working over the next month and a half with the auditors to finalize our financial statements, and then we can update that number to be 100% accurate. Right underneath that number, it lists out all of our local sources. So this would be where our tax levy is located, as well as any of our student fees. The next section is what we consider the 300s, so other school districts would send us money. This is our open enrollment revenue. And then it just kind of goes down the line. The 500s are intermediate sources. So for instance, we receive a little bit of funding from CISA. The state sources are next. This is where you would find our categorical aid and our general aid, as well as some of the other state aids that we receive. At the bottom of that page is our federal sources, which are all of our federal grants, just in the general education fund, not special education. And so if you kind of go to the second page, right above the gray box, I could say our total revenues are at about $51,089,575. Underneath that section are all of the general fund expenditures, and we have to lay these out by function, which basically describes what part of the school district those expenses are actually being expended. So you'll see that it's listed out by different areas of curriculum and different areas of support services. And all of these items listed here are the expenses for Fund 10. You'll notice at the kind of almost at the bottom, you'll see a $51,089,575 expenditure budget, which means we're presenting a balanced budget to you today. I went over that relatively quickly. All of the detail behind this that we would put in the annual meeting packet, you'll see on August 18th. And if there's any updates between now and then with any of our grants, we would include that at this time, or at that time. And then just going through the rest of the document, the next section is called Special Projects Fund, and that's where we separately code out all of our special education revenues and expenditures. And those, again, are a balanced budget at $7.2 million. Our Debt Service Fund is the next section. And that's all of our referendum and non-referendum debt. So these would include any of our debt payments that we'll have to make. You do notice that there's a fund balance there, and that's because we have to hold enough money in reserves. So when we set the tax levy, we actually can make our payments in October of the next year. So that's why you'll always see a fund balance in that section. Our Capital Projects Fund, this is the fund that we set up last year. By setting up a special Capital Projects Fund, we're able to move general operation expenses into that fund. And what the state allows us to do then is to amortize the cost of those expenses out over a number of years so that we don't get hit with a lot of aid because of high costs that we may have for that year. So the board approved that at the annual meeting last year, and we will ask you to do that again this upcoming year. The next section is food service, and these are updated numbers based on our changes to the food service program, both opting out at the high school, the National School Lunch Program, as well as the contracted service taking on the cost of all employees. And then the Community Service Fund, the last fund, has a budget in there for, this is basically for the costs of the PAC as well as any other community service operations that we have. We have a relatively small community service budget. But included with that is a community service tax levy. And we'll go through the levies in just a minute. Any questions on that overview? Okay, the next document that we can look at then is called the Forecast Model Output for August 4th. And basically this is just an output from our forecasting model. It shows 2 years of history for you, so the 12-13 and the 13-14 school year. It shows our anticipated enrollment growth, and again for 14-15 we're not expecting enrollment growth. Our per pupil increase from the state for revenue limit purposes, which is $75 again this year. We used an estimate right now of a 1.5% decline in equalized valuation growth. I'll be talking with the city in the next couple of weeks to kind of determine where they're at with how they see values, and we can make an adjustment to that. Any adjustment we make to that number won't have a significant impact on our tax levy, so there can be a slight adjustment up or down. This shows our general operations revenue and expenditures, and again showing no surplus or deficit, so a balanced budget. It shows our fund balance as well as the fund balance as a percent of expenditures for our district. The next line shows the total school-based tax levy, so we'd be looking at a tax levy of about $32.5 million. And then before we talk about the tax rate, we'll go to the next document. which is the forecast model levy from August 4th. And what this document shows, again, it has some historical numbers for you, but this is our tax levy for the district. And we start off, we can set a separate levy for our general operations, as well as our referendum and non-referendum debt. The Fund 41 levy, which is our capital projects levy, simply offsets Fund 10. So if we didn't have that levy would be pushed up into Fund 10. So it's not like we could reduce the levy if we moved money out of there. And then the Fund 80 levy, again, is the community service. So overall, we're looking at a total levy of $32.5 million. Right now, for the district, that's a decrease of 0.34%. Now, again, these numbers are all preliminary. We receive our actual student count numbers the third Friday in September. We receive the final state aid amount from DPI on October 15th. And then we also get our fall equalized valuations. And all those numbers are then used to finalize the budget and the tax levy for the annual year.
So you might recall that we had anticipated getting actually an increase, a very, very slight increase in aid.
0.11%.
And ultimately, it was a decrease.
Yeah, we actually got 1.2% less aid than we anticipated, but the way that the aid formula for us is determined is there's 3 different tiers of aid that we get, and because of how our spending historically was, it kind of determines how much aid we get in the future. And however much, if we spend more than what we budget, we actually get less aid. So this year, if you go back to the output summary document, you'll notice that in 13-14, we're actually estimating to roll about $185,000 into fund balance. And so because we spent less than we actually thought we were going to, our shared costs went down, which means we'll actually get more aid for spending less, which is why we got that offset from a 0.11 to a 0.34 decrease.
I just, all they're doing is making districts do shell games. You're gonna budget higher. You're gonna levy higher, and then throw it back into fund balance. So.
Well, we can only levy what they allow us to.
I understand that, but if you're in a situation in some districts that are going to be in a situation where they maybe could levy less, but they won't because they'll use that money as a budget holder, so they can get more aid the following year because they'll spend under it by not spending their full budget. It wasn't thought out very well.
Julie, I don't quite totally follow the Fund 38 levy offset. What was that again?
Oh, I'm sorry. That is the debt that we have where we actually receive subsidy payments. So it's that zero interest loan from.
That was for the energy thing, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was years and years ago, I think. And so basically, what we do is we get a subsidy every year to reimburse us for the cost of the interest.
What is Fund 38 exactly?
That's non-referendum debt. So the school can levy up to $1 million of debt without going to referendum, and that's part of it. Okay, so at the next meeting then we'll have more information on the 13-14 with the comparison to 14-15, draft of the annual meeting booklet, and so at that time we would ask you to approve the preliminary budget, then you would have time to make recommendations on the annual meeting booklet so that we can kind of move forward right at the beginning of September with publishing.
Any other questions? All right, thank you. Moving on with discussion items. Item 6B, policy number 2510, and guidelines and adoption of textbooks, second reading.
So as it states, this is the second reading for this policy. There are no changes to any of the documents that the board reviewed in July, but this is here if there were any follow-up questions or thoughts about this process.
I have an email draft that I'm just going to send you. It just from that conference I went to this past weekend. There's some interesting feedback on how I think you've got the majority of it here, but it's just I'll just send it to you.
Any other concerns, comments? All right, be coming forward for its last reading then. Moving on, item 6C, policy number 5771, school and student safety searches, second reading.
So the only change in this policy is just the elimination of the word intimate. On page 2, the board had a few questions that were addressed in July, and be happy to answer any other questions, or if I forgot to respond to anything.
Sure.
So thank you for the attachments, Dr. Thompson. So, I brought up my concerns the last time about the challenges for this kind of a search, and my concerns remain. So the case law that we've been provided is not our circuit. The circuit that we're in Wisconsin is the 7th Circuit. This is the 8th Circuit. Circuits are very different from one circuit to the next. So so not only is it circuit specific, but this case also is Missouri specific. And I read the case, so that I guess my concerns remain in that in this particular situation, what the court found is first of all, there was question whether in fact there was a seizure and a search. So that was a fact question. But not only that, but one of the things that the court relied on to support the school district was, in the course of this case, there were obviously depositions that were taken, maybe evidentiary hearings, and the court says in their opinion there was substantial evidence showing there was a drug problem in district buildings, and that was in the facts section of the case, buttressed by district records showing that the number of drug incidents in the district from the years 2000 to 2011 ranged from 89 to 205 per year. A school police officer from the high school testified that he frequently received reports from students, parents, and teachers, in fact, handling on average 3 or more times per week drug-related incidents. So I guess my concern is I don't know that we have those facts. So that's one issue. I guess that I would be more comfortable with this policy if there was a case in Wisconsin, or if there was a case in the 7th Circuit. So it makes me incredibly nervous that we would perhaps be the district that would be perhaps one of the first to have a challenge. Mm-hmm. And well, we're all aware, litigation is costly.
It would be more of a preventative approach from our standpoint. Mm-hmm. One more thing within our toolbox with regard to prevention and detouring students from bringing drugs onto the property.
So what point are you actually not, or is there a specific item that concerns you in the policy, or is it the policy in general?
The policy in general.
Okay.
That you're separating belongings of the student, the backpack or the purses or whatever we decide it is, from the student without. With what I see right now is just a general deterrence policy. I mean, right? The case makes very clear that the way that the court approaches these is looking for particularized, reasonable, foundations for why you're implementing the policy in the first place. And my concern would be if our rationale is it's a general deterrence and we don't have these kind of statistics in our district, I'm not sure how a court would come out on that. Maybe they would find that's a laudable thought, but it's not based in a reasonable point.
So the specific language is on page 3 of 4 under the use of dogs, and it's the 3rd paragraph starting with, on occasion, students may be asked to leave their backpacks, bags, or other personal belongings in classrooms, right?
Right, but if we were, again, I think if a student were to challenge it, and then the district would have to support it, I don't know, right? So I don't know how many drug-related incidents we've had in the last 10 years that we could document. I don't know if our school resource officer at the high school would say, on a regular basis, I deal with 5 drug-related incidents a week, or 5 drug-related incidents a month, or in a year.
Do we have that data?
The data? I'm sure we could.
I just,
Yeah.
I mean, I assume that falls under the same, maybe this is a stretch, but you can't just have a fee. The fee has to be specific to something. So you can't just say at registration, assign a fee and just pay it. I mean, the fee has to be very specific for a purpose. Same thing here. There's no, if you have this deterrent policy, deterrence by the very nature, there should be some data showing that you
Or deterring something.
Right. So you're saying that we just don't have the data.
I'm saying I don't know.
I haven't seen it.
Right.
I mean,
no idea.
I've heard about it. I can hear things, but that's all you're saying, anecdotal. I really don't have that. I guess I assume we do at times, but maybe we didn't, or I don't know.
You've had conversations with Michael Donnell about this?
Yes.
Would it be, well, 2 things. One, would you be willing to reduce to writing your concerns?
Sure.
And, well, my point being is having Mike address those explicitly. I mean, maybe, I don't know, maybe you've shared those with verbatim, but I think maybe an attorney writing them down to another attorney, and then he could share his response with all of us, that we could see, you know.
Yeah,
I think it's worth the investment up front of the little, you know, the legal opinion on it, based on your concerns. I mean, you've got merit. I read it, but and the one thing, I'm not an attorney by any means, but the 2 different states things even stuck out to me as like, well, that's, you know, you can't use precedent from another state for different constitutions and everything. So I think it'd probably be worth the time to do that. You know, one of the concerns I have on here is the false positives that we sometimes get. That, you know, if you're asking a young lady to examine the contents of her purse because of a false positive, I'll have a short leash on that if that happens a lot. I asked to have it, you know, us re-bring that policy back.
Rick, do we have data on that?
Yes, we shared false positives on all the any of our dog searches. Dr. Thompson will send out notification that those emails that come out.
Okay, and that just okay. I think I recall. No, they'll have the dogs came through.
12
suspected,
nothing was
1 actual.
done,
Right.
Okay. Okay.
Right. And the reason I said last time we had an extremely high, unusually high false positive, and part of that is we, you know, newer dogs and.
Is that a database, or is that just?
What, the unusual high?
No. Could I go in, or could we go in and see over the last 5 years? How many searches we had? How many? Can you pull the data?
We don't have it in a particular.
Okay, so it's really just a point in time that search is done, the report's created, and then. So we really don't even have data then.
But we have data. I mean, it just has to be compiled. I mean, I could pull up every email going back to Dr. Schrader from the thing.
Right. Really don't. We really don't. Good.
So, listening to Lisa's concerns last time, I think what we come to is, let me pull up here. Students may be asked to leave their backpacks. I think the point is, what if the student says, I don't want to leave my backpack or purse, and takes it with? I think it was kind of decided, well, then we'd be searching that particular
That
piece.
would be, yes.
And I think that's maybe where I mean, if a person leaves their backpack in the classroom, then it's open to being, I say, simped out by the dogs, being, you know, having them walk around.
Right.
I think that's just pretty much over, just like it would be in a locker or whatever else. But if they want to take it with them, I think maybe that's where we might have some issues. They decide, I want to take my purse with me, I want to take my backpack.
Yeah, and that could be viewed by administration as reasonable suspicion.
Which, that part just baffles me, because if I get stopped for a traffic stop and I consent to them searching my car, and I take my satchel with me, that doesn't give them probable cause to search. I only gave them consent to search the car, and that's it. You know, so why is the...
It's reasonable suspicion. We have a far less...
I understand that. It just puzzles, that concerns me.
So going back to the policy, and just the only part, from my perspective, given what the concerns that are raised, if we took out that paragraph, all the other components of the policy would be as we do it now.
That entire paragraph?
Yes, we have canine searches. That was the only added component to this policy to address a deeper dive search into the classroom component. So if we would remove that, we would be where we are currently at with regard to canine searches, just so you know.
Right.
Unless somebody brings up something else, I just want you to know that was added specifically for the board to consider that type of a search.
And I don't necessarily say I'm against doing that. I guess I have concerns. For one, I want to make sure it's legal. I don't want to spend the money defending something that, you know, we have a possibility of losing. The other part is, you know, ask them to leave it and just leave it.
Leave it at that?
Leave it at that.
Yep.
They leave it, they leave it. They don't, they don't. But
And that's administrative rules,
yeah,
that we could decide that in fact is what we'd want. You know, we don't have to have it be reasonable cost, so.
One quick question for Lisa. For the if a ruling by another circuit, is that used as kind of background information for a ruling in another circuit, or is it totally they ignore it?
They can do what they want.
Okay.
Each circuit can be completely opposite of another circuit.
Okay.
as you've seen with
this circuit to this and this one to this. They can, but
as many circuits as there are, they could do, right, you could have half on one side and half on the other, and that's a big enough issue, that's when it goes to the Supreme Court.
You're seeing that now with the marriage things.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
You know, if this was the Ninth Circuit, probably wouldn't be doing this, right?
If it was a Ninth Circuit and they found it constitutional, every other circuit would probably, well, the Ninth Circuit's different. So, yeah.
Entity unto itself.
Yeah.
All are, but
yeah.
So would it make sense for the board to have another discussion on this policy rather than going to action next time?
Well,
we can...
leave it for action. We can have
Okay.
discussion, and we don't have to act on it just because it's on the agenda. So.
Okay.
And I'll just send you an email, Kelly, sending forth what I basically said tonight.
That would be wonderful. Thank you. Appreciate that.
Thanks for the input. Moving on, discussion item 6D, policy number 8390, animals on district property, first reading.
We actually have Kari here, and she'll give us some background information why this is coming outside of the NEOLA process.
Good evening. We have 2 families in the district who are considering having service dogs attend school with their children in the 2014-15 school year. Neither of the families has yet secured the dog, but they are fundraising for the dogs. So we are faced with ensuring that we have a policy in place that will support the interest of our students as well as the district. And so that's why it's coming out of the sync within the policy structure that we have in place for NEOLA. Did you have any questions for me tonight?
Not so much for you. The policy, and we've had a policy in effect for animals on district property for a while. Unless I'm missing it, doesn't state anything in here as far as police search dogs or anything like that. We should probably add that.
Yes.
I think we just have to touch on that. Just a paragraph would be fine.
It has to be mentioned. This is not in here. But from my viewpoint, from what I've seen, as far as the safeguards and everything else, requirements of the dog, and I'm okay with it. Anyone else have any? Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Move Moving on to item 6E, board self-evaluation. In the packet and in front of you tonight are the compiled outcomes of the board self-evaluation that we actually started in February, March. Sorry, what?
I said 6 months ago?
Yeah, 6 months ago. You'll see that there's only 6 respondents. Jim Schaefer did not respond on there, as you did. Neither did Chris Buckmaster, so that's why we have.
Well, you didn't ask me to respond.
Right, because you were new.
So there was really no response required of me.
Correct.
So.
He was not neglecting his duty. He was asked,
Thank you.
He was asked to keep his opinions to himself for the first year. As you can go through it, positives from it are the 2 most negative categories: occasionally and never. We don't have any in there. The couple topics that felt there were some board concerned over was board members refrained from committing to a position on an issue before all the facts are presented. So essentially coming with some prejudices or predetermined thought before we had a full board discussion. Was kind of split on that between consistently and mostly. The other item was talking about the board is focused on student learning and aligning its structures and district resources to support achieved and designated goals. There was a couple concerned that, well, we mostly do that, but it looks like there's some room for improvement on there, so that was split. And board focuses its time on matters of policy, planning and evaluation, and delegates responsibility for administrating board policy and day-to-day decisions to superintendent. So there's some concerns that while we mostly do that, we still get involved in micromanaging at times. Those are the things that stood out to me. I don't know if anyone else has any. There is one comment that was given in there. It's at the end of it. One person shared. And it somewhat mimics those items that we just discussed. So, yeah.
My only comment would be, we do this because of policy?
Board policy, yes.
Okay. My only comment on it would be if we could, and I understand this year was different because we had a turnover in the board, but if we could address this more closely to when we actually took the survey.
Well, and specifically what had happened, we had a turnover of the board, we had a turnover of board president, and there were a number of items that came up in the last couple board. We have less meetings in the summer, and the last couple times the agenda was getting a little longer, and we decided not to. So, yes, it will be relatively, I would say within a meeting or two of the close of it, we will have this brought forward. I'm also going to look at the questions and everything else, so I may fine tune it going forward.
Oh, the questions are the questions by policy?
I don't think so. I don't believe they are. If they are they? The specific questions? Okay. I'll take a look at it before, then maybe I'll bring it back. If I have concerns with, for instance, I can bring it back for policy change.
I think the Neola policy doesn't have it, though.
Okay.
I think it allows us to make those adjustments.
Thanks for sharing, everyone, your input. Number 7, information follow-up, anyone?
It's not information follow-up. Maybe I should have mentioned this out of board reports, but just a compliment to the district office today. I was one of the parents who was having problems getting on the Infinite Campus site, and then I kept getting the nice little Google screen. I didn't want to pick any more pictures for my security stuff, and it was very promptly dealt with and very professionally, and I appreciate that. Apparently, I was the only one that was really anxious to fill those out because the message went out pretty much right away after I said, "Hey, can I get past this screen?" So,
see, I did fill out the questions, and I got right through them.
I
had to choose all my 8 pictures.
Yeah, you did like a zillion pictures.
But I did that already. See, I did that screen like previously, and then it brought me again, and then it wouldn't take my password. It was all kind of
Yeah, that's the security part where you choose the pictures. That's supposed to happen. We have to repetitively do it. That's not supposed to.
Right. So I already did it, and it was making me do it again, and then it wouldn't take my password.
Right.
So that, I was the glitch.
All right.
Yeah. So
Fair
thank you to the staff for dealing with that.
As a public notice, if you don't mind me just bouncing something real quick, that's the e-funds, which is our capacity to pay registration fees online. It can still be done manually without completing the online registration. We want all families to do that successfully. If there's any concern about fees, that can be done online. There's a link right under the parent link on our website.
Very good. Any more information follow-up? Hearing none, a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
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 We are adjourned at 8:14.